The rain had been falling since morning, turning the busy streets into rivers of silver. Cars splashed past one another, horns echoing in frustration, and people hurried under umbrellas trying to stay dry. On the side of a quiet road near the outskirts of the city, a black car stood still, its hazard lights blinking in the soft drizzle. Inside sat a woman in her early 30s, wearing a crisp white shirt that matched the calmness she showed to the world. Her hands rested on the steering wheel as she stared at the flat tire, unable to believe her luck. She had left her office early that day after a long meeting that left her drained. Running one of the city's most successful interior design firms came with endless pressure, deadlines, clients, and decisions that never seemed to stop. Yet here she was, stuck on a lonely road, her phone battery dying and no one answering her calls. She sighed deeply, pushing a strand of hair from her face. She wasn't the kind of person who liked asking for help. For years, she had built everything on her own, her business, her home, her independence. But now, as the rain grew heavier, she realized she might have to depend on someone, at least for this one thing. Just then, a small pickup truck slowed down and stopped behind her car. The sound of the brakes was followed by footsteps splashing through puddles. She tensed slightly, locking her doors by instinct. The window fogged up from the inside, and she wiped it clear with her palm just in time to see a man standing outside, holding an old umbrella. He wasn't dressed like anyone she usually met. His clothes were worn, his jacket a little faded, and his shoes were clearly soaked from the rain. But there was something calm about his face, something that made her feel he wasn't a threat. He tapped lightly on the glass and spoke with a gentle tone. "You need help with the tire?" For a moment she hesitated. Then she nodded, lowering the window slightly. "Yes, I think it's flat. I was going to call for assistance, but..." She glanced at her phone. "My battery's almost dead." "Don't worry," he said, smiling slightly. "I can fix that. I've got tools in my truck." Before she could say much, he was already walking back to get them. She stepped out, holding her handbag close, the rain immediately soaking her shoes. He knelt beside the car and began loosening the bolts, his movements quick and practiced. "You do this often?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. He chuckled softly. "Only when someone needs help. Tires and engines don't scare me much." She watched him quietly. He wasn't trying to make conversation to impress her, nor was he acting nervous. He just focused on what he was doing, occasionally humming under his breath. In a world full of people who talked too much and cared too little, there was something refreshing about that. Within 15 minutes, he was done. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, rain dripping from his hair. "All set," he said simply. She looked at him, unsure how to thank him. "You really saved me. I'm sorry I don't have cash with me right now." He shook his head quickly. "I didn't do it for money." His answer made her pause. Most people she met were always looking for something. Business deals, favors, recognition. But he didn't seem to want anything. He was already walking back to his truck when she called out, "Wait! At least let me buy you coffee. There's a cafe down the road." He turned slightly, rainwater still dripping from his sleeves. He seemed surprised but nodded. "All right. I won't say no to coffee." They drove separately to the cafe, a small place that smelled of warm bread and roasted beans. She ordered 2 cups and found a quiet corner. When he joined her, he looked around awkwardly as if he wasn't used to such fancy places. "This isn't really my kind of spot," he said with a small grin. "But it smells good." She smiled. "It's nice sometimes to just stop and breathe." He nodded. "That's true. Most people forget how to do that." They talked for a while, mostly about ordinary things, the weather, the city, little everyday struggles. She learned that he worked odd jobs around town. Sometimes he helped at a repair shop. Other times he volunteered at a community center teaching kids how to fix bicycles. He lived simply, without much to his name. When she told him about her work, he listened carefully, asking questions that most people never asked. He wasn't trying to flatter her or seem impressed. He was genuinely curious. "It must feel good," he said, "to build something from nothing." "It does," she admitted, "but it also feels lonely sometimes." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Lonely? You seem to have everything." She gave a small, almost sad laugh. "That's what everyone thinks." The rain outside began to slow, the drops turning to mist against the glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something easy about their silence, like they didn't need to fill it with meaningless words. When they finally left, he offered to walk her to her car. She thanked him again, and as he turned to go, she asked, "Do you come to this cafe often?" He shook his head. "Not really. Can't afford to." Something about the honesty in his tone made her heart tighten a little. "Well," she said, smiling gently, "maybe next time coffee's on me again." He gave a small nod and walked away, his figure disappearing into the fading rain. She stood there for a long moment, watching him go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had appeared out of nowhere. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself it was nothing, just a small act of kindness from a stranger. But somewhere deep inside, she knew it was more than that. It was the way he had looked at her, not as a successful woman or someone to impress, but as a person. A real person. Over the next few days, she found herself visiting that same cafe more often, half hoping she'd see him again. The staff began to recognize her, greeting her warmly each time. But he didn't show up. One afternoon, as she was leaving, she saw him across the street helping an old man push a cart full of fruit. Without thinking, she crossed over. "You again," she said with a smile when he noticed her. He laughed. "Yeah, guess I'm always running into people with bad luck. Or maybe you just show up where you're needed," she replied softly. He looked a little embarrassed and shrugged. "Maybe." She offered to help with the cart, and together they pushed it up the hill. It was strange how natural it felt, like she had known him for years. When they reached the top, the old man thanked them both, and she turned to him again. "You still volunteer at the community center?" she asked. "Every weekend," he said. "Keeps me busy. Keeps me sane. Do they need donations?" He smiled faintly. "They need time more than money." "You could come see for yourself." She hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. That weekend, she drove to the small community hall where he spent his time. It was filled with laughter, children running around, walls covered with hand-drawn posters. She stood there quietly, watching him kneel beside a boy's broken bicycle, showing him how to fix it. For the first time in years, she felt out of place, but in a good way. Here, no one cared about brands or status. Everyone was just real. When he noticed her, his face lit up in surprise. "You actually came," he said. "I said I would," she replied with a small smile. He handed her a tool and said, "Then you might as well help." And she did. She spent the entire afternoon there, talking, laughing, feeling a kind of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The children liked her instantly, and by the end of the day, her perfectly manicured hands were smudged with grease, but she didn't care. As she drove home that evening, she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and realized she was smiling without forcing it. That night, she couldn't help but think about him again, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. He had no wealth, no ambition to climb ladders, no desire to impress anyone. Yet he had something that everyone else around her seemed to lack: peace, kindness, and an honest heart. She didn't know what this strange connection meant or where it would lead. But one thing was clear: her life, with all its success and structure, suddenly felt incomplete without his quiet presence in it. Sometimes, life doesn't send you what you expect, it sends you what you need. And that rainy afternoon, stranded on a lonely road, she hadn't just found help. She had found the beginning of something that would soon change her heart in ways she never imagined. Days turned into weeks, and life went back to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. She spent her mornings in meetings, her afternoons visiting clients, and her evenings staring at her phone, wondering if she should message him. But she didn't even have his number. All she knew was that he volunteered at that small community center every weekend, and for some reason she couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something quieter, something that made her smile at random moments and remember the warmth in his voice. She kept telling herself she was just curious, that she only wanted to thank him again, but deep down she knew it was more than that. That weekend, she found herself driving back to the community center. It was a bright Saturday morning, and children's laughter filled the air as she parked her car nearby. He was there, sitting on a low bench, helping a young girl tie the chain of her bicycle. His clothes were simple, his hands rough, but his face carried that same calm expression she remembered. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "You came back," he said, a little surprised. I said I would, she replied, returning his smile. I brought some art supplies for the kids. I thought they might like them. The children rushed to her car when she opened the trunk, their eyes lighting up at the boxes of paints, papers, and crayons. It wasn't much, but the joy on their faces made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Real happiness. He watched quietly, his eyes soft. They'll love this, he said. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she answered simply. The rest of the morning passed with laughter and chatter. She helped the kids draw, though most of them ended up with paint all over their clothes. Every now and then she caught him watching her, his expression gentle as if he couldn't quite believe she was there. When the children left for lunch, they sat outside on the steps of the old building. The air smelled of dust and sunlight. She looked at him and asked, Do you do this every week? He nodded. Yeah, keeps me grounded. Kids remind me that life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. She thought about his words for a moment. You really believe that? He smiled faintly. I have to. I don't have much else, she tilted her head, curious. You don't ever wish for more? He shrugged. Of course I do. Everyone does. But I used to chase things that didn't last. Now I just try to find peace in what I have. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She thought of her big house, her expensive car, her designer clothes, all the things she once believed defined success. And yet, she had never felt that kind of peace he spoke of. Over the next few weeks, their paths kept crossing again and again. Sometimes, she'd stop by the community center after work, bringing snacks or small donations. Other times, they'd meet at that same cafe where they first shared coffee. Each time, their conversations grew a little deeper. He told her about his past, how he had once dreamed of starting his own repair shop. But things hadn't worked out. A business partner had cheated him and he had lost everything. For a long time, he carried that failure like a shadow, believing it defined him. But then he found purpose in helping others, even when he had very little himself. She listened closely, not out of pity, but admiration. There was honesty in his story, the kind of honesty people in her world rarely showed. In return, she told him about her own life, how she had built her company from scratch, how she had worked nights, sacrificed friendships, and buried her emotions under deadlines. Everyone admired her success, but no one saw the emptiness that came with it. You must have a lot of people around you, he said one evening as they walked through the park. People, yes, she said softly, but not connection. There's a difference. He nodded, understanding without needing her to explain further. Their friendship became a part of her routine. She began to look forward to their talks more than her meetings. Sometimes she would catch herself smiling during work, remembering something funny he had said. Her assistant noticed the change too. You seem different lately, the assistant said one afternoon. Happier, she didn't deny it. Maybe I just found something real for a change. As days passed, she realized she was seeing him not as someone with less, but as someone who carried more kindness, more patience, more sincerity. And he, though quiet about it, seemed to care for her in his own way. He never tried to impress her, never made her feel small for being successful. He just treated her like a person, not a title. One evening she decided to visit him without calling ahead. The community center was almost empty except for him and two kids playing with a ball outside. He was sitting on the steps, lost in thought. She walked up quietly and said, You look tired. He smiled faintly. Long day, but a good one. She handed him a cup of coffee. I thought you might need this. Thanks, he said, taking it with both hands. You know, I still don't understand why someone like you spends time here. What do you mean by someone like me? She asked. You've got everything most people dream of. You could be anywhere right now, fancy dinners, big meetings, and yet you're here sitting with me. She looked at him for a long moment. Maybe those things don't mean much anymore. He raised an eyebrow. What does then? She hesitated, her voice softening. Honesty, peace, someone who looks at me without expecting anything in return. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told her he understood. A soft breeze passed between them. Somewhere in the distance, the children's laughter echoed, fading with the evening light. For a few moments, they just sat there in silence, sipping coffee, both lost in thoughts they didn't dare speak out loud. In the days that followed, she started inviting him to her office occasionally, asking for help with small maintenance work around the building. At first he refused, saying he didn't want to mix things. But she convinced him, and soon he was there once or twice a week, fixing lights, adjusting furniture, and joking with the staff. Her employees were curious, whispering among themselves about the quiet man who had captured their boss's attention. But she didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't living for what others thought. One afternoon, while he was repairing a shelf in her office, she asked, "Don't you ever get tired of doing everything for others?" He smiled as he tightened a screw. "Maybe, but helping others helps me too. Makes me feel like I still matter." "You do," she said softly, surprising even herself with the emotion in her voice. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and for a second, neither of them moved. It wasn't a romantic moment filled with dramatic tension. It was something simpler, something deeper. It was two people seeing each other's truth. After that day, their bond grew stronger. They started sharing parts of their lives that no one else knew. He told her about his mother who had passed away when he was young, and she shared how she had grown up feeling invisible despite having everything. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, yet they understood each other better than anyone else ever had. But even in those peaceful moments, she knew there were questions waiting in the background, questions about where this connection was heading, about the line between friendship and something more. She could feel something changing inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. One evening, after another long day, she found herself sitting by her window, watching the city lights. Her phone buzzed, a message from him. "Thank you for everything today," it read. "You don't know how much it means to me to have someone believe in me again." She stared at the words for a long time before replying, "You don't need anyone to believe in you. You're already enough." Her message stayed unread for hours, but when the reply finally came, it was simple. "Maybe. But it helps when it comes from you." She put her phone down and smiled to herself, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know where things would go from here. All she knew was that something beautiful was growing between them, not built on wealth, looks, or status, but on quiet understanding. And though the world around her kept moving at its usual pace, she felt her life slowing down, finally catching up with the things that truly mattered: kindness, trust, and a heart that was learning little by little what love could feel like when it was real. Time passed quietly and their bond kept growing stronger. It wasn't built on promises or expectations, just small moments that slowly began to mean everything. She didn't even realize how often she thought about him now, how his voice could calm her after a stressful meeting, or how his simple way of looking at life made her rethink what really mattered. Sometimes, after long days at work, she would drive by the park just to see if he was there, and most of the time he was, sitting on the same old bench reading a second-hand book or helping a stranger with something. He always seemed to have time for others, no matter how tired he looked. One evening she walked over quietly and sat beside him. He turned to her with that familiar gentle smile. "You again," he said softly. "I could say the same about you," she replied. "Don't you ever take a break?" He laughed. "This is my break, watching people, listening to the wind. It reminds me the world's still a good place." She looked at him for a moment, admiring how peaceful he seemed, and then said, "Sometimes I wish I could see life the way you do." "You can," he said. "You just have to stop running long enough to notice it." Those words stayed with her long after that evening. That night she couldn't sleep. For years her life had been a chase, chasing clients, deadlines, recognition. But lately she'd been craving something slower, something real. And somehow he had become part of that feeling. But not everyone saw it the same way. Her friends started to notice the change in her too. How she'd stop attending events. How she no longer cared about social circles or appearances. One afternoon she met two of them for lunch. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place she used to love. "So," one of them said, sipping her drink, "we heard you've been spending time with someone. Who is he?" She hesitated. "He's just a friend." "A friend?" The other one laughed. "Come on, we know you better than that." "What does he do?" "He works here and there," she said carefully. "Mostly community work." That made them exchange looks. "Community work?" One repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean he doesn't have a real job?" She put her fork down. "It's real to him, and he's happy doing it." They both chuckled, the kind of laughter that sounded polite but sharp. "Sweetheart, you can do better. You've worked so hard to build your life. You deserve someone on your level." The words stung more than she expected. She smiled tightly, pretending not to care, but inside something twisted. That evening, she sat alone in her car for a long time before driving home. For the first time, doubt began to creep in. She told herself their opinions didn't matter, but their voices kept echoing in her mind. The next time she met him, she found herself quieter than usual. He noticed immediately. "Something on your mind?" he asked gently. She shook her head, forcing a smile. "Just work stress." He didn't press her, but he looked at her for a long time as if he could see through the mask. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. She wanted to tell him everything. The judgment, the pressure, the fear that maybe everyone else was right. But she couldn't. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about the children at the center. As they walked together, she noticed his hands, rough and scarred, yet gentle when he spoke. He didn't have much, that was true. But when he smiled at her, she realized she had never felt more seen. Still, the doubt didn't go away. It lingered like a shadow. A week later, one of her business associates invited her to a charity gala. It was a formal event, the kind that required gowns, music, and polite small talk. Normally, she would have gone alone, but this time she asked him to come with her. He looked surprised. "Me? Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "You help that community more than anyone I know. You deserve to be there." He hesitated, but finally agreed. When he arrived that night, dressed in a simple suit, he looked both nervous and calm at the same time. She could see that he didn't fit in with the glittering crowd, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. People turned to look, some curious, some whispering. She felt it, the weight of their judgment, but she stood beside him proudly, ignoring the whispers. Later that evening, while she was greeting some guests, she overheard a group nearby. "Isn't that her?" one woman said softly. "The CEO? And who's the man with her? He doesn't look like he belongs here." "Heard he's just some mechanic or something," another replied. "It's sad, really. She could have anyone." The words hit her harder than she expected. She glanced toward him and saw him standing near the doorway, looking a little lost but still smiling politely. When the event ended, they walked outside together. The night was cold and quiet. He noticed her silence. "Did something happen?" She hesitated. "People were talking." He nodded slowly. "They usually do," she sighed. "They don't understand you." He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe they don't have to. Something about his calmness made her feel small. "I just don't want people to look down on you because of me." He smiled faintly. "If I cared about what people thought, I'd never get out of bed in the morning." She wanted to believe him, but the voices from earlier still echoed in her mind. That night, after dropping him off, she sat in her car and stared out the window, feeling torn between two worlds, the one she had built with power and control, and the one he showed her full of peace and truth. The next few days felt strange. She became distant, answering his messages later and skipping their usual coffee meetings. He didn't push her, but she knew he felt it. One evening, when she finally agreed to meet him, she could tell he had something on his mind, too. They sat in their usual park, and after a long silence, he said quietly, "There's something you should know about me." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" He took a breath. "I wasn't always this calm. Years ago, I tried to start a business with a friend. It failed. I lost everything: money, trust, reputation. That's when I stopped chasing big dreams. I couldn't handle losing again." She listened carefully. His voice didn't tremble, but she could feel the pain behind his words. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to see me as someone broken," he said. She reached out instinctively, but he looked away. "I thought being simple would be easier," he continued, "but maybe it was just hiding." Her heart ached for him, not because of what he'd lost, but because he had carried that shame alone. "You're not broken," she said softly. "You're human." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but people don't always see it that way." She wanted to say that she did, that none of it mattered to her, but before she could, a group of her colleagues passed by. They saw her with him and stopped briefly, offering polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The look they gave her said everything. Quiet judgment, silent disapproval. He noticed too. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not jealousy, but sadness. Later that night, as he walked her to her car, he said quietly, "Maybe they're right." She frowned. "About what?" "About us being from two different worlds." She shook her head. "Don't say that," he smiled sadly. "You don't need to defend me. I know what people see when they look at us. You worked hard for your life. You deserve someone who matches that." She felt her throat tighten. "I don't care about that." "I know you think that now," he said softly. "But one day you will. And when that day comes, I don't want to be the reason you're torn between love and pride." She didn't know what to say. The air between them felt heavy, filled with things neither of them could explain. He took a step back and said, "Thank you for seeing something good in me when no one else did. But maybe this is where we stop pretending the world won't interfere." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away. She stood there under the streetlight, her eyes stinging, her heart beating faster than she could control. She wanted to call out to stop him, but the words wouldn't come. As his figure disappeared into the dark, she realized something she had been avoiding all along. Love wasn't always enough to silence the noise of the world. That night, as she sat alone in her room, the silence felt louder than ever. She had everything she once thought she wanted: success, respect, a beautiful home, but none of it mattered now. Because for the first time in her life, she knew what it felt like to lose something money could never replace. The days after he walked away felt longer than usual. Every morning she woke up expecting a message from him, something small, even a simple "good morning." But her phone stayed silent. The quiet hurt more than she had imagined it would. At work, she tried to focus. She buried herself in projects, meetings, and deadlines, telling herself that she was fine, that she didn't need anyone. But deep down she knew she was lying. Every place she went reminded her of him. The cafe where they shared coffee, the park bench where he read his old books, even the community center where laughter once made her forget the noise of her world. She missed the calm he brought into her life. He had this way of making everything feel slower, simpler. Without him, everything felt rushed again, empty again. Her friends noticed the change. "You seem distracted lately," one of them said during lunch. "I'm just tired," she replied quickly, not wanting to explain. But the truth was, she wasn't just tired. She was lonely. The kind of loneliness that sits quietly inside your chest and refuses to leave. Weeks went by before she finally decided to visit the community center again. It had been a while, and she wasn't sure if he'd even want to see her. Still, she couldn't help it. She needed to see him even from a distance. When she arrived, she stood at the gate for a long moment before walking in. Children were playing, their laughter echoing across the open ground. The sight made her smile, even though her heart was heavy. And then she saw him. He was on the other side of the yard, fixing a swing while talking to one of the kids. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly messy, his expression calm. Just like always. For a second, she thought about turning back. But then he noticed her. Their eyes met, and he froze for a moment before giving a small, polite smile. It wasn't the same smile he used to give her. It was distant, almost careful. She walked over slowly. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hey," he replied, his tone gentle but guarded. "It's been a while." "I know," she said. "I wasn't sure if I should come." He nodded, focusing back on the swing. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said softly. "I miss this place." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "The kids missed you too." They stood in silence for a few seconds, the sound of children filling the space between them. She wanted to say so much, to tell him that the last few weeks had felt wrong without him, but the words wouldn't come. "How have you been?" she asked finally. He shrugged lightly. "Busy, trying to keep things running here." She looked around. The paint on the walls had started peeling, and the swings looked older than before. "Do you get any help?" "Not much," he said. "But we manage." "We always do." Something in his voice broke her heart. She knew he was trying to sound strong, but she could see the tiredness in his eyes. "Let me help," she said quietly. "I can donate." He stopped her with a small shake of his head. "I don't need your money." "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. "I just want to do something useful." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed softly. If you really want to help, stay and paint a wall with the kids. That's more useful than money. She smiled faintly. Deal, so she stayed. For hours, she helped paint one of the walls with bright colors, the children laughing as they made messy handprints everywhere. He worked beside her, not saying much, but the silence between them began to feel less heavy. When they finally finished, the sun was setting, turning the sky into shades of orange and gold. They stood side by side, looking at the wall they had painted. It looks good, she said softly. It does, he agreed. They'll be proud of it. The children ran off, leaving the two of them alone. For a while, neither of them spoke. The air was filled with the soft sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Finally, she said, I'm sorry. He turned to her, confused. For what? For everything, she said quietly. For letting other people's opinions get in the way. For making you feel small when you're the only one who ever made me feel human. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. You didn't make me feel small, he said. I just didn't want to be the reason you lost what you worked for. She shook her head. I already lost something more important. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat down on the steps, his hands clasped together. You know, he said after a while, I used to think love was about giving people everything they wanted. Now I think it's about giving them what they actually need, even if it means letting them go. She sat beside him quietly. But what if letting go was the wrong thing? He gave a small smile. Then life will find a way to fix it. They both fell silent again, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the buildings. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't even romantic, but it was real. Two people sitting side by side, both carrying the weight of what they didn't say. Over the next few weeks, she started visiting the community center regularly again. She didn't push him, didn't try to talk about the past. She just helped, painting, teaching, cleaning, doing whatever needed to be done. Slowly, the space between them began to shrink. Sometimes they'd share lunch on the steps, talking about ordinary things. Other times they'd just sit in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. The hurt didn't disappear overnight, but something gentler began to take its place. Understanding. One afternoon, she brought a small box filled with new supplies for the kids. He looked at it, then at her, and said softly, You really don't give up, do you? She smiled. Not when something feels right. He laughed quietly. You know, you're different now. Different how? She asked. Quieter, he said. More real. She thought about it for a second. Maybe I just stopped pretending. That made him look at her with a warmth that felt like sunlight. I like this version of you. Her heart skipped. And what about you? You still hiding behind calm words and broken dreams? He smiled faintly. Maybe a little, but you've made it harder to hide. They both laughed softly, and for the first time in a long while it didn't feel awkward. It felt like home. Weeks passed like that, quietly, peacefully. But life has a way of testing what's real. One afternoon, while she was helping one of the kids with homework, her phone buzzed. It was her business partner calling about a major deal, one that required her to travel abroad for several months. It was an opportunity she had once dreamed of. That night, she sat on her balcony staring at the city lights, thinking about what she should do. The old version of herself wouldn't have hesitated. She would have packed her bags immediately. But now she wasn't sure. When she met him the next day, she told him about it. He listened quietly, not interrupting. When she finished, he said, That sounds amazing. You should go, she frowned. You think so? He nodded. You've worked for it your whole life. Don't hold back because of me. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. But what if I don't want to go without you? He smiled gently. Then you'll come back when it's right. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest. That night, as they said goodbye, there was something different in the air. Not sadness, not distance, just quiet acceptance. Before she left, she turned to him. You once said love is about giving people what they need, she said softly. But what if what I need is you? He looked at her for a long moment, his voice almost a whisper. Then I'll be here when you come back. And she believed him. The next morning, as her car pulled away, she looked back at the small community center disappearing in the distance. It wasn't goodbye. It was a pause, a moment in time that would wait for her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Some people don't come into your life to change what you have. They come to show you what you've been missing all along. And as her plane rose above the clouds that night, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, he had nothing to offer but his heart. And somehow that was everything. Months passed. Her time abroad was busy, exhausting, and full of achievements, yet none of it felt complete. The meetings, the deals, the constant travel, it had all been part of the life she once wanted. But no success, no matter how big, could fill the quiet emptiness she felt inside. She thought about him every day, not in a fleeting way, but in a way that tugged at her chest. She remembered the sound of his voice, the calm in his eyes, the way he saw her. Not as a CEO, not as a woman with wealth and power, but as someone human, someone worthy of kindness and care. Every accomplishment abroad felt smaller because he wasn't there to share it, because she had realized that what mattered most wasn't the things she had, but the love she had never allowed herself to embrace. One rainy evening, as she packed her bags for the flight back home, she looked out of the hotel window at the dark city lights. The rain mirrored the feeling inside her. Heavy, relentless, impossible to ignore. She knew with a certainty she couldn't explain that it was time to go back. Not to the life she had left, but to the life she had been missing. The moment she stepped off the plane, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, as if it knew she had come back for the right reason. She didn't rush to her home, didn't even stop by her office first. She drove straight to the community center, her heart pounding as she imagined seeing him again. The center looked the same, yet alive in a way that reminded her of the first time she had walked through its doors. Children played, laughter bouncing across the open yard, and there he was. He was helping a boy fix a bicycle chain, his hand steady, patient, gentle. He looked up and froze for a moment when he saw her. Then a small, surprised smile appeared on his face. "You're back," he said, almost whispering. "I am," she said softly, stepping closer. "I missed this place. And you." He set the tool down and walked toward her, still cautious but visibly moved. "I wasn't sure you would come back," he admitted. "I had to," she said. "I realized something important while I was away. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I was missing what really matters." His eyes softened. "And what's that?" She reached out, taking his hand in hers. It was rough from work, calloused from helping others, yet it felt like the safest place in the world. "This," she whispered. "You?" For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the children faded into the background, leaving only the two of them, standing there in the quiet understanding that had been growing between them for months. He squeezed her hand gently, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I was afraid. I didn't think someone like you could want someone like me," he said softly. She shook her head. "It's not about what someone has or doesn't have. It's about who they are. And I've seen who you are, someone real, kind, and honest. Someone who makes life feel simple and beautiful again." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I thought I had to hide my past, my failures. I didn't want to lose you before we even started. You never had to hide from me," she said firmly. "I don't care about mistakes or money or status. I care about love. And I've realized that love isn't about what someone can give you materially. It's about what they give from the heart." He laughed softly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "You really think someone like me can give that?" "I know it," she said, smiling. "You already have." They walked together toward the yard where the children were playing. She helped a few of them with their bikes, and he showed her how to tighten a chain properly. The laughter returned, filling the air around them like music. For the first time in months, she felt complete, not because of accomplishments, but because she was where she was meant to be with someone who saw her soul. Later, when the children had gone home, they sat on the steps together. The sky was painted with soft pinks and purples from the setting sun. She leaned slightly against him, feeling the warmth of his presence. "I never thought I'd feel this way," she said quietly. "I always thought love had to be complicated, that it had to match the world's idea of perfection." He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Love is never complicated. We just make it that way when we let fear take over." She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. Honesty, patience, acceptance. "I want to stop running from it," she said softly. "I want to stop thinking about what I should have and start living for what we can have together." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've waited for this," he admitted. "Not because I wanted you to come back, but because I hoped you would see what I already knew, that we belong together, not in theory, not in status, but in reality." Her heart swelled with emotion. "I've seen it now, and I don't want to waste another moment." He leaned closer, and she felt the careful, tender press of his lips against hers. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't dramatic, and it was simple, real, the kind of kiss that spoke of patience, longing, and promise all at once. They pulled back slightly, smiling at each other, their hands still entwined. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the yard, as if the world itself was celebrating their reunion. Over the next few weeks, she spent more time at the community center than anywhere else. She still managed her business, still had meetings and responsibilities, but her heart felt lighter. She helped paint, organize, and even teach small lessons to the children. But mostly, she spent her days learning from him, learning how to see life through his eyes, how to value small moments, and how to give love freely. He, in turn, started opening up more. He shared stories from his past that he had never told anyone, his voice quiet but steady. She listened, never judging, only holding space for him. He showed her his world, the people he helped, the quiet victories that went unnoticed by most. And she realized that his life, though modest, was full of meaning and richness that no money could buy. One rainy afternoon, as they were walking home from the center, she stopped under a small awning. Water ran down the streets in silver streams, and the world seemed to hold its breath around them. She turned to him, taking his hands in hers. "I never thought I'd find this kind of love," she said softly. "Not in a world like mine. Not in a man who has nothing to give but his heart, and yet, here it is." He smiled, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "And you have everything but love. And somehow we found each other anyway." She laughed lightly, a sound full of relief and happiness. "It seems impossible, but it's real." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Nothing about love is impossible. It's only real when two people are brave enough to see past the rest of the world." She closed her eyes, breathing in the moment. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about wealth, success, or approval. She was thinking only about him, about the quiet strength of his heart, and about the life they could build together, simple, honest, full of love. In the following months, they created a life that didn't need validation from anyone else. They spent mornings with the children, afternoons at the community center fixing things, and evenings sharing simple dinners. They laughed, argued gently, and supported each other through small struggles and big decisions. She had once believed that love had to be grand to be real. He had once believed that he was unworthy of it. Together, they learned that love is real, not because it is grand, but because it is true. And one evening, as they sat on the steps watching the sunset, he turned to her with a quiet seriousness. "You know," he said, "I always thought I had nothing to offer. But being with you, loving you, showing up for you, it's more than I ever imagined." She took his hands in hers. "And I thought I had everything but no love. Now I see that what I was missing all along was this. You." He smiled, a soft, radiant smile that lit up everything around them. "Then I guess we're even," she laughed gently. "Even better than even. We're whole." As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, they sat together, hands entwined, hearts finally at peace. No wealth, no status, no judgments from the world could touch the truth they had found in each other. He had nothing to offer but his heart. And that heart had given her everything. She had everything she once thought mattered. And now, she had love. And in that quiet, simple life they built together, they realized that sometimes the greatest treasures come from the smallest, most honest gifts of all.